I slid into the chair at the head of the long oak table, my back straight, though my heart fluttered like a trapped bird. The low hum of the chandelier above me and the soft clink of silverware against china filled the room with a false warmth that made me shiver inside, as if all the polite conversation and forced smiles around me were a masquerade I'd been invited to, but never wanted to attend. My husband, Mark, sat beside me, offering a reassuring squeeze of my hand under the table, and I felt a spark of gratitude for his calm presence, even though I could see the tension in his jaw as he surveyed my sister Emily across the table, tapping her fork against her plate, as though counting down to some secret moment only she knew about. My parents sat at either end, Mom with her perfectly coiffed hair, and Dad with his crisp suit, and between them lay the centerpiece, a cake I'd baked myself, frosted in pale pink and dotted with tiny white flowers, which now seemed absurdly innocent in a room that crackled with silent expectation. Emily raised her glass, and in her clear, cool voice announced, "To my wonderful sister, on her special day, may this year be full of happiness." A round of tepid cheers followed, and I lifted my glass, my lips brushing the rim, and swallowed the sugary wine in one quick breath so I wouldn't choke on my own nerves. I forced a smile at Emily and said, "Thank you," though her eyes flicked past mine to settle on Mark, and I realized then that she had something more to say, something big, something she'd hinted at in her text. I saw Mom's hand twitch beside her plate when the words came, and I felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Emily took a breath, her smile turning sly. "Speaking of happiness," she said, "Mark and I have some news that I think will surprise you all." My heart dropped. I felt Mark beside me stiffen. I pictured our life, the little house we'd bought together, our Sunday morning pancakes, the way he kissed my forehead when I cried. And I tried to remind myself he would never do anything to hurt me. But her next words shattered that conviction. "I'm pregnant," she said, turning to me with an expression of triumphant glee. My breath caught. I dropped my gaze to the tablecloth. "She's joking," I told myself, but the laughter until then politely held back by the table broke into startled gasps and nervous giggles, and I looked up to see Mark's face pale, his eyes wide. Then Emily laughed outright. "Just kidding," she said, letting the words fall like a curtain that closed on the moment. "Got you good, didn't I?" The room exhaled in relief. Everyone except me. My heart pounded. I forced myself to laugh too, the sound hollow in my ears. But inside, I felt something shift. I noticed the way Dad's eyes never quite met mine, the way Mom's hand quivered as she reached for her napkin, and the way Mark's shoulders sagged in relief before he caught my eye and gave a tiny, worried nod. This wasn't a harmless prank, I realized. She wanted me to feel that sting, and I found that I did feel it, like a lash across my skin, because I knew that somewhere in her joke lay a hidden truth. After dinner, I withdrew to the kitchen under the pretense of clearing dishes, but really to steady my racing pulse and sort through the tangled thoughts in my mind. I ran cool water over my wrists, watched the ripples in the sink, and breathed deeply. It was a joke, I reminded myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily and Mark shared something I didn't know about. A memory surfaced of seeing them whisper in the garden last month, when she'd invited me over to catch up and had looked at me with something unreadable in her eyes. I recalled Mark's nervous laugh as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. I forced the memory away. I loved my husband. He loved me. That's what I told myself as I returned to the dining room. But the moments that followed only deepened my unease. I overheard Emily pull Mark aside by the open patio door. Their voices were muffled, but I caught fragments. "We'll go ahead with the story," Emily saying, and Mark replying, "You sure?" She looked pretty shaken. Then Emily laughed softly. "Perfect," she said. Just the reaction I wanted. My chest tightened, and I realized that their little comedy had been a test. I swallowed hard and returned to the table, sat down, and lifted my head to meet Dad's gaze. He gave a quick nod as if to say, "Play along," and I did. We chatted about work, about the roses my mom had planted in spring, about how this year's turnout for my birthday was the best yet. But every word felt like a small betrayal, a secret knife twisting in my gut. When the evening drew to a close, Mom insisted on a group photo. We lined up in front of the fireplace. Emily on one side, me on the other, Mark behind me, our arms around our waists. As the camera count reached 3, I closed my eyes for a moment, took a breath, and when I opened them again, I held Emily's gaze. There was no warmth there, only triumph. I wondered how long that smile would last. That night, after everyone left, Mark asked what was wrong. I leaned against the cool glass of the patio door and watched the wind stir the curtains. It wasn't funny, I said quietly. He wrapped his arms around me, but I felt a barrier between us, invisible but strong. She crossed a line, I told him. He nodded, stroking my hair. I know, he said, and in that moment I saw regret flicker in his eyes, regret I hadn't seen before, because before tonight, he had only seen me with love and comfort. I took his face in my hands and pressed my lips to his, tasting the faint tang of wine and cinnamon. I love you, I whispered. He closed his eyes and held me tighter, but when we pulled apart, I could see the guilt on his face. That guilt gave me something I needed, clarity. I realized I didn't need to confront Emily, at least not tonight. I would let her believe she'd won, that her little prank left me broken, but I wasn't broken. I was just beginning to understand that some jokes carry a poison, and it was time to find the antidote. I straightened my shoulders, brushed my hair back, and looked at him. Tomorrow, I said, I'm going to find out what really happened between you and Emily. His gasp was soft, but enough. He knew I meant it, and so I went to bed that night with a mind buzzing like a hive. I would be patient, careful, quiet. I would let Emily and Mark reveal their secrets in their own time. Then I would strike back in a way so unexpected, so thorough, that the sting of their betrayal would pale in comparison to the shock of my response. As I drifted to sleep, I pictured their faces when they realized that this wasn't a harmless joke at all, but the beginning of a reckoning they never saw coming. The next morning felt quieter than usual, like the world had pressed pause just long enough for me to remember everything that happened the night before. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, painting warm gold on the countertops, but it didn't reach me. It just made the air feel heavier, like the house itself knew something wasn't right. Mark moved around softly, making coffee, humming a tune that used to make me smile. But now, every note felt like a distraction, something too light for the storm sitting in my chest. I watched him closely, not with suspicion exactly, but with the kind of attention you give someone when you're trying to remember what you might have missed before. His smile when he handed me my cup looked almost too perfect, too practiced, and I realized how little I'd noticed his habits until now. I thanked him, sipped slowly, and told myself again that today wasn't about confrontation. It was about listening, watching, and staying one step ahead. After he left for work, I sat in the quiet kitchen and stared at my phone. I had no concrete proof yet, just a sick feeling in my gut and a few strange fragments from the night before. But that was enough to start. I opened my laptop and began scrolling through old pictures. Birthday parties, holidays, random dinners. Emily was in almost all of them, always positioned close to Mark, sometimes too close. Her hand on his shoulder during a toast, her smile a little too wide during last year's 4th of July barbecue. I'd always brushed it off as sisterly affection, as Emily being Emily. Bold, attention-seeking, flirtatious in a way she insisted was harmless. But now those images took on a different meaning, and I felt my stomach twist as I saw how often Mark looked at her instead of me. I went further, digging through texts. I'd never snooped through his phone, never felt the need to, until now. But even now, I wasn't ready to cross that line, not yet. So instead, I opened the group chat Emily had started with me last year, just the two of us. I scrolled up, looking for anything strange, anything that didn't feel like a normal sister conversation. And then I saw it, a message from a few months ago that I barely remembered reading at the time. She'd sent a selfie in a red dress, standing in my guest bathroom, with the caption, "Your lighting makes me look hot." No wonder Mark likes visiting. I'd laughed it off then, assuming it was another one of her dumb jokes. But now, it felt like a breadcrumb. My pulse quickened, and I saved the photo to a folder I quietly named Answers. That evening, I suggested we invite Emily for dinner, and Mark hesitated just a second too long before nodding. "Sure," he said, "if you want." That hesitation told me everything. He didn't want her here, not with me watching, and that meant I needed her here more than ever. Emily showed up 2 hours later, dressed casually, but with just enough effort to look effortless. Her lipstick was the same shade she wore the night before. The kind Mark once said reminded him of movie stars. She brought wine, made jokes, acted like nothing happened. But I watched her closely, noting the way she avoided my eyes when I asked if she wanted kids, how her laugh faltered when I told Mark I'd been thinking a lot about trust lately. She knew. She could feel the shift in the air, even if she didn't understand it yet. At one point, when Mark stepped outside to take a call, I leaned in and asked, "So, when did you come up with that pregnancy prank?" Emily blinked, her smile faltering for the first time. "Oh, that," she said. "It was just a silly idea. I thought you'd laugh." I didn't smile. "You didn't think it would hurt me?" I asked, letting my voice soften but not break. She looked down at her wine. "You've always been so sensitive. I figured you could take a joke." That word, sensitive, cut deeper than I expected, and I felt my grip tighten around my glass. The rest of the evening passed with fake laughter and stretched out goodbyes. When she finally left, I watched from the window as she texted someone before getting into her car. A moment later, Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it, just turned off the screen and walked away. That silence told me everything I needed to know. They were still talking. They had something to hide. I stayed up late that night, heart pounding, mind racing, trying to connect the dots. I started keeping notes, a secret document on my laptop where I tracked her comments, his reactions, my observations. I wasn't ready to confront either of them, but I knew I had to be prepared for when I did. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was building my moment. I didn't want revenge, not yet. I wanted truth, and I wanted it on my terms. So I started reaching out to old friends, to mutual acquaintances, even to Emily's ex-boyfriend, who I hadn't talked to in years. I made it casual, polite. I asked questions that seemed harmless, but the answers I got weren't. One person told me they'd seen Emily and Mark at a hotel bar 6 months ago, laughing, drinking, too close for comfort. Another remembered Emily bragging that she could have any man in the room, including the married ones. It wasn't confirmation, not exactly, but it was enough to make the picture clearer. As I pieced it together, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, not yet, but something colder, more focused. I wasn't going to cry about this. I wasn't going to beg or plead or throw a tantrum. I was going to wait. I was going to let them feel safe. I was going to make them believe I had no idea. And then, when they least expected it, I was going to show them just how much I knew. I didn't know how it would end yet, but I knew it would end on my terms. That night, as I crawled into bed beside Mark and felt the weight of his arm around my waist, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Good night." My voice was steady, my breathing calm, but in my mind, I was already writing the final scene. The following week passed like a dream I couldn't quite wake up from, each day starting with the same familiar rhythm, the same warm cup of coffee, the same soft kiss on the cheek from Mark as he left for work, and yet beneath all of it, there was a current, a low electric hum in my chest that reminded me this wasn't routine anymore. It was theater, and I was no longer the naive housewife in the wings. I was the woman in the spotlight, finally awake, finally aware of the show playing out around her. I moved through each day with deliberate ease, smiling more than usual, making jokes, acting lighter, so neither of them would suspect that I was watching, that every detail mattered now. The times they texted, the way their eyes met and flinched away, the casual phrases that carried too much meaning under the surface. I started leaving my phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, knowing Emily would glance at it when she visited, and I made sure the last message open was always something innocent. A recipe, a chat with a coworker, never anything that hinted at what I was really thinking. I'd ask her to hang out more often. Sister time, I'd call it, and she'd laugh like she was in control. Like I was just the same old fragile thing I'd always been. Easy to read and easier to dismiss. But every time we sat down for coffee or went shopping, I learned a little more. She let her guard down in small, careless ways, mentioning Mark's favorite brand of whiskey like it was common knowledge, making offhand jokes about stealing someone's man like she wasn't standing in my living room, wearing my perfume. One day, when I knew Mark was out and Emily stopped by unexpectedly, I invited her in for tea. I made her favorite blend, peach and honey, and served it in the antique cups Mom had given us when we were kids. As we sipped, I steered the conversation to memories, our old school days, the time she fell off her bike and cried for an hour until I gave her my necklace to calm her down. She laughed, and for a moment I saw the girl I used to love fiercely. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. You know, she said, stirring her tea, Mark really reminds me of that boy I had a crush on in high school. What was his name? Daniel? Tall? Quiet? Kind of brooding. You always liked the same type I did. She smiled, but I could feel the edge behind her words. Sharp, cutting, full of history and jealousy, and something darker I hadn't seen clearly until now. That night, I waited until Mark fell asleep, his breath soft and steady beside me, and I tiptoed into the guest room, Emily's usual space when she stayed over, and began searching. I didn't expect to find anything obvious, but people like Emily always left traces when they got too confident, and sure enough, tucked behind a stack of old books in the nightstand drawer, was a folded piece of paper, crumpled and rewritten. Her handwriting, a list, weekend, bring wine, keep phone silent, no one knows. My name wasn't on it, but it didn't need to be. I knew what it meant. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with an old friend of mine, Leah, who now worked as a private investigator. I didn't need photos, I didn't need drama, but I needed confirmation. I needed one last piece before I played my hand. Leah understood right away. I've seen this before, she said, tapping her pen on the table. You're not crazy. You're just done playing the fool. I nodded, feeling tears prick my eyes. Not from sadness, but from relief. Someone believed me. Someone was finally on my side. While Leah started her work, I began planting small traps. I told Mark I'd be working late, then circled back an hour later and found him gone. Not at home, not at the store, nowhere he usually went. I took photos of the driveway, saved timestamps. I forwarded messages from Emily to my personal email, just in case they were ever deleted. I created backups of backups. And through it all, I smiled. I cooked dinner. I laughed at his jokes. I answered Emily's texts with heart emojis. I made them both feel safe. Because if I had learned anything from all this, it was that people let down their guard when they think they've already won. Then one night, Mark told me he needed to get away for a weekend work retreat. He packed light, avoided eye contact, and kissed me quickly at the door. I'll miss you, I said sweetly. He smiled, but his shoulders were tense. I let him go. And then, as soon as the door closed, I called Leah. Follow him, I said. Don't lose sight of anything. The next 2 days were a blur of waiting. I kept myself busy, organizing closets, scrubbing the kitchen tile, even painting the bathroom just to stay grounded. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. And then, on the second night, Leah sent me a file. Inside were photos. Clear, sharp, undeniable. Mark, in a hotel lobby, Emily arriving 30 minutes later. The same room key, the same elevator, the same door. I stared at the images for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My breath stayed even. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. Instead, I felt something cold and clean sweep through me, like stepping out of a fever into perfect clarity. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They thought I was blind. But now, I held every piece I needed. I could have screamed. I could have thrown things. But instead, I sat down at my desk and began to write. Invitations, a guest list, a date, a perfect setting. Emily was planning an engagement party soon with a man who didn't even know half her secrets, and I was going to give her the spotlight she craved. Just not the kind she expected. I spent the next few days moving through the world like a woman carrying fire under her skin, but no one could tell. Not Mark, not Emily, not even the neighbors who smiled as I waved to them from the porch while sipping my morning tea, like everything was exactly the same. That was the beauty of it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him or send the photos with a dramatic message. I simply watched them, both of them, and I smiled a little more, laughed a little louder, hugged him a little longer before bed, and all the while, I was planning something that would make every ounce of their betrayal worth the silence I had suffered through for years. I wasn't going to just leave or throw plates or fall to my knees like the woman they thought I was. I was going to let the truth sit quietly in the room with them until it exploded. Emily had been planning her engagement party for weeks now, bragging to anyone who would listen about the venue she'd booked and the caterer she couldn't afford but hired anyway, telling everyone that this would be the most beautiful moment of her life. The irony didn't escape me. how easy it was for her to slip into the fairy tale while playing villain behind the curtain. What she didn't know was that I'd quietly made a few calls of my own. The owner of the venue? A former client of mine from when I helped his daughter win a legal settlement. The caterer? A woman I'd supported during her divorce who still called me her guardian angel. All it took was a few gentle reminders, a few favors asked, and suddenly I had eyes and ears on everything related to Emily's big night. The morning of the party, I woke early, dressed with care, choosing a sleek black dress that hugged my body just right, my hair pinned back, my eyes lined sharp, the same way I used to dress when I was young and bold and fearless, before the world told me to shrink myself. I looked in the mirror and saw not a wife, not a sister, not a victim, but a woman who had walked through fire and come out with steel in her spine. Mark came downstairs already dressed in his suit, adjusting his tie, looking at me with a kind of nervous admiration he didn't bother to hide. "You look amazing," he said, his voice soft, unsure. I smiled, thanked him, and kissed him on the cheek like I always did, pretending I didn't know where he had been just a week ago with my sister. Let him think everything was forgiven. Let him think I was over it. That was the whole point. When we arrived at the venue, the hall was glowing. Soft candlelight, delicate flowers, champagne glasses lining every table. Emily floated through the crowd in her shimmering dress, laughing like the queen of her own fantasy. And for a moment, watching her from across the room, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the note in the drawer, the whispers behind my back, the way she had smiled when she thought she'd fooled me, and the pity vanished like smoke. I waited until everyone had arrived. Family, friends, coworkers, and when the room was full of people who knew her, trusted her, adored her, I made my move. It started with a toast. I stood quietly by the piano, gently tapped my glass with a spoon, and smiled as the room quieted. "I know this night is about love," I began, my voice clear, calm. "So I thought it would be a perfect time to talk about honesty, the kind that builds real relationships, the kind that survives storms, and the kind that refuses to live in the shadows." A few people nodded. Assuming I was about to share some sentimental story, Emily smiled nervously from across the room. Mark stood frozen, and then I pulled the small black folder from my purse. "I wasn't sure if I should say this here," I continued, my hands steady. "But then I thought, if we celebrate love in front of others, why not also reveal betrayal, so it never grows where trust should live?" The room went silent. I opened the folder and pulled out the photos, carefully selected, just enough to show the truth, not enough to humiliate completely. A shot of them walking hand in hand through the hotel lobby. Another of Emily leaning into Mark, her hand on his chest. Nothing vulgar, just enough to burn. The silence was heavy. Emily's mouth opened, but no words came. Mark stepped forward, stammering something I didn't hear, because by then I had already turned to the guests and said, "This is not to ruin a night, it's to free one." I handed the photos to Emily's fiancé. He looked at them, then at her, and slowly took a step back, his face blank, then stormed out without a word. Someone gasped. Someone dropped a glass. Emily began to cry. And I didn't move. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, calm as ever, letting the storm wash over them. That night, I didn't go home with Mark. I took my own car, drove to a hotel near the lake, and booked a room with a view of the water. I sat on the balcony, a soft breeze on my face, and for the first time in years, I felt something strange and beautiful, peace. The days after the party felt strangely quiet, like the world had turned its volume down just for me. I didn't return Mark's calls. I didn't answer Emily's texts. I didn't speak to anyone, really. I took long walks by the lake in the early mornings, wrapped in a soft gray sweater, watching the fog lift from the water like smoke rising off the past. For the first time in years, I was alone with my thoughts, but not lonely. There was something oddly comforting in the silence, in the stillness, like my soul had finally stopped spinning and remembered how to breathe. I moved into a small apartment near my workplace. It wasn't fancy, but it had warm light, clean walls, and big windows that made me feel like I was part of the sky. I filled it with little things I loved: plants, candles, a blue armchair by the window where I could drink my tea and watch the world go by. There was no pretending here. No need to smile when I didn't feel like it. No need to keep secrets. Just peace. Work became more than just a job. I started showing up early, staying late, taking on projects no one else wanted. My boss, Richard, noticed. He was kind. A man in his late 50s with soft eyes and a calm voice who never rushed a conversation and always remembered how I liked my coffee. He didn't ask about my past. He just saw me as I was. And that, more than anything, made me feel safe. One day, after a long meeting, he walked me to my car. It was just starting to snow, and the flakes landed gently on his dark coat. "You've changed," he said quietly, looking at me not like a boss, but like someone who saw the woman behind the polite smiles. "You're stronger now." I smiled, not because I had to, but because I believed him. Something in me had shifted, and I wasn't done changing yet. The first time I walked into the gym, I felt like I didn't belong there. The air smelled like rubber mats and protein shakes. The walls were lined with mirrors that seemed a little too honest, and everyone looked like they knew exactly what they were doing. But I reminded myself why I came: to get stronger, not just in spirit, but in body. I wasn't trying to look 20 again. I just wanted to feel like I could carry myself without pain, without shame, without the weight of what other people thought I should be. At first, it was just light treadmill walks and a few beginner stretches. My body ached in places I forgot existed, and more than once I sat in the locker room debating if I should go home and pretend this never happened. But something inside me kept whispering, "Stay." So I stayed, every day, even when it hurt, even when I felt invisible. And then one afternoon, I joined a small group dance class, mostly older women like me, some shy, some sassy, all of us trying not to laugh too hard at our own mistakes. That's where I met Danny. He was the instructor, young, full of energy, and so easygoing it was impossible not to smile when he danced. He wore these bright red sneakers, always moved like the music lived in his bones, and had this habit of encouraging everyone like we were all stars of a Broadway show. I didn't think he'd even notice me, but he did. After class one day, as I packed up my bag, he walked over and said, "You move like you used to dance, did you?" I laughed. "A long time ago," I said. "High school. Before, well, life." He smiled and nodded, like he understood without needing an explanation. "Well," he said, "it's still in you." From that moment, something shifted. I started showing up early to class, stretching more, laughing more, dancing harder. I began wearing tighter leggings and brighter colors, not to impress anyone, but because I liked how I looked in the mirror again. Danny started staying after class to chat. He complimented my strength, my grace, even the way I rolled my eyes when I missed a step. At first, I brushed it off. He was young, full of charm, probably just kind to everyone. But then he offered to grab coffee after class one day, and my heart skipped in a way I hadn't felt in years. I didn't say yes, not right away. I wasn't sure I was ready for something like that, but I smiled and said, "Maybe next week." And just like that, the world opened a little wider. It was a quiet evening, just like many lately. I had a soft blanket over my legs, a book resting open on my lap, and the gentle hum of the city outside my window. I had just finished a bowl of warm soup and was settling into the kind of peace I never used to know when there was a knock at the door. It wasn't urgent or loud, just 3 slow taps, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they belonged there anymore. I already knew it was Mark before I even stood up. Some part of me just felt it. When I opened the door, he stood there holding a small tissue-wrapped object. He looked tired, unsure, not like the man who used to speak over me and fill every room with his presence. He asked if we could talk, and I hesitated. I had imagined this moment so many times, how I'd slam the door or laugh in his face. But now that it was real, I felt calm. So I let him in. He sat at my little kitchen table, quietly unwrapping the bundle to reveal a tiny porcelain ballerina. "You used to love these," he said. His voice was soft. "I don't know why I was so cruel. I thought you'd never leave. I thought I could say anything, do anything, and you'd still be there." I stood across from him, not angry, not cold, just steady. "You didn't just hurt me, Mark. You erased me, and you didn't notice I was fading until I was already gone." He nodded, eyes lowered. "I miss you," he said. But I didn't miss him. Not anymore. I felt sad for the woman I used to be, but not for him. "I'm finally happy," I told him. "I've found myself again, and I'm not going back." He stood slowly, whispered that he hoped I stayed that way, and left without asking for anything more. I closed the door, leaned against it, and just breathed. There were no tears, no regrets, just stillness, the kind that feels like healing. That night, I went to dance class. I moved with freedom, smiled with ease, and when Danny caught my eye across the room, I smiled back, not because I needed saving, but because I was finally enough for myself. The weeks after Mark's visit felt different. Not heavier, not darker, just more alive. Like the air carried a quiet electricity, and I could feel it in my chest when I walked into the gym or poured my morning coffee. I was sleeping better, smiling more, and every time I caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw someone I actually liked, someone strong, capable, beautiful in her own way. I had lost weight, yes, but it wasn't just about the weight. I walked taller. I wore lipstick again. I chose color over black. My body was changing, but so was my spirit. I was no longer trying to shrink. I was trying to grow. Danny noticed. He always noticed. It started as playful comments during dance class. Things like, "You're glowing today," or, "Careful, you're stealing the spotlight." I laughed them off at first. He was young, energetic, full of life. Surely he flirted with all the women, right? But then came the extra attention, lingering glances, small touches on the arm, staying after class to chat just a little longer than needed. One day, after class, he walked me to my car. The sun had just started to set, and the sky behind him was soft pink and gold. "You know," he said, leaning against my car door with that half smile, "I like talking to you. You're different from the others. You're real." I laughed nervously. "Real as in older?" He smiled wider. Real as in honest. You don't try to be someone else. You're strong, and it's attractive." Something fluttered in my chest, and I hated that it did. I was old enough to be his mother. Almost. Not quite, but close enough to know better. Still, that part of me, the part that had felt invisible for so long, woke up, stretched, and listened. He wasn't just being polite. He liked me. The next week, he invited me out for coffee. I said yes. Then I canceled. Then I said yes again. Then canceled again. I wasn't playing games. I was genuinely torn. Part of me was curious, flattered, even hopeful. The other part was cautious, careful, afraid of repeating old mistakes. He didn't pressure me. He just smiled and said, "Whenever you're ready." And maybe that was the most tempting part. He saw me, wanted me, but wasn't trying to own me. He wasn't trying to fix me, or change me, or hold me down. He was just there. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, wearing a dress I hadn't dared try on in over a decade. It fit perfectly. I brushed my fingers across the fabric, stared into my own eyes, and whispered, "You don't owe anyone anything, not even love. Just stay true." And with that, I turned off the light. The next few days passed like I was walking on a quiet edge between two cliffs, one marked by everything I had let go of, and the other marked by everything I could now choose. I saw Danny at the gym, at class, in the mirrored studio where sunlight spilled in during the late afternoon sessions. And each time I caught his eye, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Not just attraction, but safety, playfulness, ease. It wasn't just about his smile or his body or the way his voice dipped low when he teased me. It was how he made me feel like there was no clock ticking, no expiration date stamped on my skin, like I wasn't too late for anything, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. He didn't push. He never once made me feel like I owed him anything. But the invitation still lingered in the air, an open door I hadn't stepped through yet. Every time I came close, I pulled back, not because I didn't want it, but because the woman I used to be kept whispering from the corner of my mind, warning me not to lose myself again. But the woman I had become, the one who had walked away from shame and silence, who had rebuilt herself piece by piece, she was growing louder. I thought about that for a long time one evening as I sat on the couch in my apartment, wrapped in a soft robe, my favorite chamomile tea in hand. The windows were open, and the night breeze carried in the sound of distant laughter, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the faint clink of glasses from a nearby patio. It felt like the world was living, breathing, moving forward, and I didn't want to stay frozen in place. So the next day, after class, I caught Danny as he packed up his speaker and water bottle. I took a breath and said, "Okay, coffee, but only if you still want to." He looked up, that familiar grin blooming across his face. "I've been waiting for you to ask." We went to a quiet place just around the corner. Nothing fancy, just a cozy cafe with mismatched chairs and chipped mugs that somehow made it feel more honest than anything else. We talked for 2 hours straight, about nothing and everything. Our childhoods, our favorite movies, how he once auditioned for a reality show on a dare, and how I used to dream about running away to Paris when I was 23, but never bought the ticket. He didn't talk to me like I was older or fragile or anything less than fascinating. And I realized something sitting across from him, that maybe the point of healing wasn't just to survive the past, but to allow yourself to be open again, brave again, soft again. When we walked out, the sun was already low. He reached for my hand. I let him take it, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I was stepping into danger. I felt like I was stepping into possibility. I used to believe that healing looked like a finish line, like there would come a moment where I'd wake up one day, take a deep breath, and everything, every wound, every bruise, every voice that ever told me I was too much or not enough would just be gone. But that's not what happened. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, in pieces, like morning light sneaking through the curtains, gentle and quiet. Until one day, I realized I could finally see the room I was in. Now I wake up in a different bed, in a different home, one I chose for myself, not because someone said I could, not because I was finally good enough, but because I wanted it. My mornings are filled with things I once thought I'd never have again. Sunlight streaming across hardwood floors, music playing in the kitchen while I stretch, my reflection smiling back at me in the mirror. Not because she's perfect, but because she's real. She's me. The insurance firm where I started answering phones 2 years ago, I now own a piece of it. I never saw that coming. But it turns out that when you stop hiding, when you start showing up fully and unapologetically, people notice. My ideas mattered. My presence mattered. And slowly, I became not just part of the team, but someone they relied on, respected, and trusted to lead. As for Danny, he's still here. He never tried to fix me, never asked me to shrink or dim myself. He's never made me feel like I needed to act younger or chase youth. Instead, he tells me I'm radiant. He brings me coffee in the morning, kisses my forehead when I overthink things, and dances with me in the living room even when there's no music playing. I once asked him why me, why someone like me, and he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Because you're everything, and you don't even know it." But the truth is, I do know it now. There are still days when old habits creep in, days when I catch my reflection and think about the girl who sat alone at lunch in high school, or the woman who cried quietly in the bathroom so her child wouldn't hear. But those thoughts don't control me anymore. I let them pass through like clouds, and then I come back to myself. And if someone out there is listening right now, maybe someone sitting in the dark like I once did, holding shame like it's theirs to carry forever, I want to tell you this. You are not broken. You are not late. You are not too old, too big, too far gone. You are still here. And if you choose to, you can still change everything. Because I did, and I've never been more alive.